What if Uncle Ben survived in The Amazing Spider-Man 1? What would Andrew Garfield's version of the webhead do? How would supporting characters around him act? And what would the story turn out to be? Let's find out. But before we get into that, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you have not already, and make sure to hit the bell next to the subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming Spider-Man fanfictions on the channel. And with that being said, let's get straight into it. We start our story just after Peter turns away and slams out of the door. The same events will play out as happened in the movie. He will go to the store, let the guy rob it, and get away. Uncle Ben will be walking down the street and see the man drop his gun on the floor. However, this time round, Ben will not try and stop him, and will simply ask the man what he is doing, trying to break through to the man. The man gets up and brushes past Ben, knocking him to the floor. Peter sees this from up above and lands on the ground, rushing over to Uncle Ben to see if he's alright. Uncle Ben will say that he's fine, and Peter will help him up. Ben says that he's glad Peter's safe, but he shouldn't be out here with guys like that with guns running around. Ben asks Peter to come home. Aunt May is worried, sick, and Peter shakes his head in disagreement, stating that he just wants to be left alone. Ben shouts to Peter, saying that he raised him. He's sorry about his father, but there's nothing anyone can do about it. He says as far as he's concerned, he's his boy. He is his father. This is a callback to what eventually Aunt May would say in TASM 2 regarding Peter in the same topic. Ben begs Peter, and Peter in his arrogant state walks away. This is where the change in character starts to happen. Peter's character in the movie changes because Uncle Ben dies. He learns the responsibility of his actions. However, in this new timeline, Peter has different motives. This pushes him to want to learn more about his parents and why they went missing, because everyone has been so shady about them recently. Peter just wants to know what everyone is hiding. We get a scene where Peter goes home at night time when everyone is finally asleep. He grabs a bunch of his dad's stuff and hides it in the basement where he won't make much noise. He searches around and finds tokens in the back of a calculator, the same tokens that were later found in TASM 2. However, due to the increased factor of him wanting to look for answers to his parents, he finds them now. We cut to a couple of scenes later and Peter has done some research. We cut to him at Roosevelt, where the train, including all of his dad's secrets, comes from the ground just like in TASM 2. He gets to the station at night time and there is a gang stood outside. Peter tries to walk past and the gang stop him, asking him for his money. Peter says that he doesn't have any money and to leave him alone. The guy starts pushing him and his friends gang around too. Peter says you don't want to do this, and then the guy says he does. They attack Peter, but Peter uses his spider agility to dodge out of the way and defend himself. Then he gets caught with a right hook across the face. Peter looks up with a face of anger and punches the guy really hard in the jaw, breaking it. Peter beats up the gang members as the ones that can still stand walk off. After he's done, Peter leaves and goes into the station with little remorse. You can see he regretted doing what he did. But he's not bothered because they attacked him. It was their fault, right? We can see Peter's ego start to build and build. His anger fuels his arrogance. The exact same scene from TASM 2 will play out from here, and obviously, if you guys know, I really don't like this plot thread too much from the TASM movies, and personally think this was the worst part of TASM 2. However, it is still canon to the universe, so I have to go along with it, and I think this is probably the most logical step in the story. So here it is. However, on the Dr. Connors side of things, things are the same and play out exactly as they would in the original movie. He uses himself as a human trial and everything plays out the same from here. He becomes a giant lizard, etc. But just before this, we have a scene where May and Ben confront Peter. They haven't spoken in a while, and since the front door was broken, they have pretty much completely avoided each other. They say to him that they know he sneaks out at night and they are worried sick. They want to know where he goes, what he does. Peter simply replies with, "You don't understand what it's like to not know anything about who you are or where you came from." May says to Ben that they should have never let him keep that briefcase. We then cut to a scene where Peter goes out to meet Gwen for his first date with her. He just leaves the house without telling May or Ben. Peter will be walking down the street and will see someone getting beaten up in an alleyway. Peter stares in their direction and walks away, thinking to himself, that's not his policy. We have to remember that this is a different version of Peter Parker here. He is more arrogant and immature in comparison to the real movie's counterpart. So at this point in the story, he is at peak arrogance. So in the date scene with Gwen, the conversation will be different. Captain Stacy will ask about Peter and his aunt and uncle. Peter will say that they're not really on speaking terms right now. The tension will rise in the scene and Captain Stacy will notice something a little off about Peter. He's cocky and he's arrogant. Captain Stacy starts to notice this. Then when When they're on the rooftop, this scene will play out quite similar to the original as well, except Peter isn't at all plastered all over the news, and Gwen's dad isn't actually after him, as he never went out looking for criminals like he did in the original movie. At this point in the movie, he would have already had his web shooters and his costume. But since this took a different turn and the characters are slightly different, Peter doesn't actually have those things as of yet. But he's still aware of his powers, as he used them earlier in the story. So then, except Peter being hesitant to show Gwen his powers, he shows her his powers willingly, trying to show off to her. However, in this version, since Peter's ego never goes checked, Gwen starts to notice what an arrogant brat Peter is becoming. He tries to show off to her, but Peter is called out, saying that you were never like this when I met you, and now that you have these powers, you're becoming someone you're not. Peter argues back, saying that no one understands him. Gwen looks at Peter in the eye and asks Peter, where is the man who saved that boy from Flash? Where did that Peter Parker go? Because he is not here right now. And Peter thinks back to earlier when he ignored the mugging and thinks to himself about the man he's becoming. He saved that boy from Flash earlier, but he did nothing about the one that he could have legitimately stopped. As this is happening, Captain Stacy leaves for an emergency on the bridge with the Lizard, as in the original movie. Peter and Gwen see this from the balcony. They ignore it for a second and Peter turns back to Gwen. Gwen says that he has to leave in a hurry all the time, so it's nothing new. He says he's sorry for how he acted with Gwen's dad, and things have been tense at home lately. He then spills to Gwen about everything that has happened. He tells her how he's gone searching for answers to his parents. Gwen asks him what he's found. Peter says that he finds out what Oscorp was really doing with Richard's research, but apart from that, next to nothing of their disappearance. They died in a plane crash just like what's been told to him a million times. Peter says this frustrates him because everyone's trying to act like Peter should know what to do, but he can't find any answers. What is he meant to do without his parents? What is he to be if his parents were so secretive? Gwen then tells Peter that you don't need to know what happened to your parents to find out the person you're becoming now. Do what you think is right, she will tell him. Peter hugs Gwen, and then they go inside, and on the TV, it says that the police officers are being overwhelmed, and they can't get the civilians out of harm's way in time, as this massive creature makes its way down the bridge. Peter looks in shock and thinks to himself that he knows the person he wants to be. He knows what he has to do, and he runs out to the balcony and leaps off the edge. Gwen runs out after him, and then looks on in shock. Peter has just jumped off the balcony of the Stacy household. He leaps from building to building because remember, at this point, Peter does not have the web shooters or even a costume. He carries on jumping until he reaches the bridge. Peter sees Captain Stacy down below with a bunch of police trying to fight off the Lizard. The Lizard throws cars off the bridge, one of the cars being the one that Peter saved in the original movie. Jack's father made it out of the car, however Jack himself didn't. His father is screaming out for someone to save his son. Peter sees this from above and leaps down. His father says that his son is in that car that has just begun sinking to the bottom of the river. Peter leaps off the bridge and lands on the car as it starts to sink. He rips open the door to see Jack unconscious at the bottom of the car. Then Peter sees next to him more cars being thrown off the bridge and into the water. He can't save all these people at once. You see, in the original movie, he saves all the cars with his webs, but this time there is nothing to save them. More cars start to sink and sink as a massive explosion can be seen up on the top of the bridge. The police are struggling to fight off the Lizard with helicopters and more armed forces getting involved. Peter is overwhelmed. What does he do? He looks down to Jack and thinks to himself, save as many people as you can. You have the power to do so. It would be a burden for him for the rest of his life if he didn't. And then what Gwen said was true. He acted out recently. That was not who he was. And this is a way to redeem himself. Peter dives in after Jack and unplugs him from his seatbelt and brings him back to the bridge, where the man says thank you as Jack coughs up water and is alive. Then Peter looks over to his left to see Captain Stacy shooting at the Lizard. As it approaches him, the Lizard disarms Captain and then in an instant impales him straight through the chest. Peter shouts, "No!" Peter was about to run over when he sees more cars sinking to the bottom. He looks over to the captain and then looks down to the cars. After the longest couple of seconds of decision making in his entire life, Peter leaps off the bridge and ends up saving as many people as he can from leaping from car to car, saving person after person. Meanwhile on the bridge, the Lizard fights off the police forces and escapes into the night. Peter returns to the surface and runs over to the captain saying, "Stay with me, Captain!" But Stacy doesn't respond as he's already lost too much blood. Peter made a difficult choice. And by choosing to leave the captain, he saved so many more people, but lost the life of one of the best men in the city. Medical staff run over as they tell Peter to get out of the way. It all fades into a blur, as we cut to the next day, and Peter is in his room staring at the wall. He thinks to himself, no one can know that was Peter at the bridge, especially not his aunt and uncle. What would happen if the world knew Peter Parker had these powers? It all went well and good before, but Gwen made him realize these powers are a bigger deal than he thought. He could actually help people, except Captain Stacy. This plays on Peter's mind, and from this moment on, Peter swears to never let anything like that happen to anyone like it did to Captain Stacy again. And if he was there a little bit earlier, he could have saved him too. What will Gwen say? Peter takes out his phone and gives her a call, but to no answer. He needs to check up on her, but before that there's also 2 other loving and caring people he needs to apologize to. He walks downstairs and Uncle Ben and Aunt May are in the kitchen, having breakfast together. The TV is on in the background, covering the news of last night, saying how there was a giant monster and a mysterious hero who saved people from thrown cars off the bridge. Peter walks in there and the scene is filled with emotion. The camera movements will be slow, the pacing will drop dead, and the scene will be filled with no music except for the sounds of the natural world, the clock tick, the kettle boil, the creaking of the ceiling, and the ambience of the TV. Peter takes a deep breath and says that he needs to apologize to them both for acting out. Peter says that he's been taken back by how much his parents kept from him, and everyone. May says that she knows how he feels. There are many times her and Ben alike have felt the need to have justification or closure, but never got it due to the secrecy of it all. They all hug each other as the scene relieves itself. We cut to a couple of days later and Peter has tried to call Gwen several times, but she hasn't answered. Peter decides it's probably best to pay her a visit in person, maybe she doesn't want to talk over the phone. So he lands next to her bedroom window and knocks on it. She looks over with a face of dread and answers. She says, "What do you want?" And Peter says he came to see if she's alright. He says that he took in what she said to him. It clicked with something inside him. Gwen says that it doesn't change anything, and Peter says it could have. Gwen turns around exclaiming, "What do you mean?" Peter says that he saw her father die trying to protect everyone from that monster. Peter says that he saved as many people as he could, but he couldn't save him. He says he's sorry. The scene sits for a while as they both stare at each other. Gwen sheds a tear and just lightly tells him to leave. Peter nods his head and steps out to the window. He says he's really sorry. He really is. Peter crawls down the wall and away from Gwen. Gwen sits there at a desk and cries as Peter leaves. Peter knows what he has to do. He can't let anything like that happen again, especially to the people he loves the most, which is why he must keep his identity a secret, so people like Gwen don't have to pay the price for knowing who he is. We get a montage of Peter making the first suit and testing out web shooters. Henceforth, from this moment, Peter won't just be a normal teenager anymore. He'll be something better, something greater, something for the people to look up and see hope. He'll be known as Spider-Man. The movie would play out fairly the same as it did before, however the difference is that Uncle Ben is still alive. So instead of Gwen being Peter's guidance, since at the end of the last part she quite clearly didn't want much to do with Peter, Ben will be the guidance. Not necessarily knowing who Peter is per se, but giving him advice on where to take himself, just as he says great power with great responsibility and all that kind of stuff. We will have a couple of scenes with May and Ben, and this will really be the only dynamic of the movie that is entirely different, since Ben is still alive. When it comes to Dr. Connors and all of the lizard stuff, that would play out exactly the same as it did in the original movie, with Dr. Connors wanting to transform everyone into giant lizards and all that. We will get the scene where the lizard attacks the school, however Gwen won't help him out this time, and she will just run away, leaving Peter to deal with the lizard himself. Peter will get extremely injured during this fight, and then the lizard runs off. Ben will call in, asking Peter if everything is okay, and he will say it is. We will cut to later on in the movie where Dr. Connors is about to detonate the serum. Spider-Man will be on the scene as well, except Gwen won't be cooking up the antidote at this point. Gwen is actually evacuating the city with her family, and Peter looks into his phone. He will try to call Gwen, and then she won't pick up, but then he will call again in desperation. This time she answers, and she says it's not the best time. Peter will explain the whole situation to her, and says that he needs her to go into Oscorp to cook an antidote. Gwen says that she can't because she's evacuating the city with her family. Peter asks her at least tell him how to do it. Gwen will tell Peter the formula and tell him how to cook it, and then Peter will head to Oscorp. Lizard puts the formula in the ejector, and Peter is trying to make the antidote at Oscorp at the same time. The lizard, however, will see this and will seek him out, and they will have a massive fight throughout Oscorp Tower. Peter is trying to stop the lizard from detonating the serum, whilst the lizard is also trying to stop Peter making a cure for it. However, since Gwen isn't there, it takes a lot longer to make it, since he has to fight the lizard at the same time. Therefore, the lizard bomb actually goes off this time, turning everyone in New York into giant lizards. However, Peter doesn't turn due to his DNA already being combined with a spider, so he is the only one safe from this detonation. However, everyone in New York is now giant lizards. Now Peter has to fight off multiple giant lizard monsters. They all start to climb the side of Oscorp Tower as the lizard calls them, whilst Peter gets the antidote. Peter almost reaches the ejector on top of the tower when the lizard stops him, saying that nothing can stop him now and for Peter to give up. We'll have the same sort of situation we had in the original movie where the lizard had his tail around Peter's neck. This time Captain Stacy isn't actually there to save him either, but due to the destruction caused by Oscorp, the floor beneath the lizard cracks and breaks, and in dramatic fashion, he is sent to the bottom of the tower. Peter webs up to the detonator and places the antidote in, as he fights off multiple giant lizards. The lizard starts to climb back up Oscorp Tower quickly, when he only has a couple of seconds left until the antidote goes off. As soon as the lizard was about to reach Peter, the antidote is released, and the city is saved. Everyone turns into humans again, including Dr. Connors. So that's TASM 1 done, but when it comes to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, things would be pretty much exactly the same as they were, except Gwen, I don't think, would have died. I reckon it would have taken Peter a lot longer to beat Electro, as him and Gwen weren't as close since she helped him in the original movie, which would have gave Goblin enough time to reach them before Electro was beaten, meaning it would have been a massive tag team showdown between Goblin and Electro, which I'm not gonna lie, if we saw that, that would have been absolutely insane. Gwen would have survived, but ultimately Peter would have won. Peter also wouldn't have had his new TASM 2 suit, since that was the suit made by Gwen in his spin-off comic, so he would have had his original TASM 1 suit. However, if Gwen and Peter did grow close in this movie, there is a possibility that going into The Amazing Spider-Man 3 or even 4, or at some point later down the line in this timeline of story, that Gwen would have eventually made him a new suit if they did eventually get close. The stuff about Peter's parents wouldn't have been as prominent, as a lot of it did happen in TASM 1 instead. However, there would be more stuff on Peter's dad and what he did at Oscorp, and I feel like this would have been a nice little B-plot for Uncle Ben and Peter to have together in this movie. I feel like it would have been a nice little side story where they could figure this out together, since Uncle Ben was Richard Parker's brother, so I do think that that would have been an interesting story. Uncle Ben would have really stepped in and be acting as Peter's guidance throughout TASM 2, just as he would have done in the first movie, but apart from that, nothing much would have really changed. With that being said, thank you guys for watching this shorter video. Sorry it wasn't a normal fanfiction format with me really narrating the story to you in dramatic fashion. It was just me explaining the events, but since you guys wanted part 3, I feel like I had to wrap it up and explain what would have happened at the end of TASM 1 and in TASM 2. Thank you all for watching. If you did enjoy and want more fanfictions, make sure to hit that subscribe button and make sure to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to not miss another fanfiction when it does come out on the channel. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care and peace.